6 years of my life. 6 years of bad coffee, fake smiles, and swallowing my pride so deep I could taste it in my shoes. And all it took to end it was one phone call from a man standing in his bathrobe on a Friday the 13th. I'd like to say I was surprised. I wasn't. What I was ready. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Let me back you up a little, because this story doesn't start in Paris. It doesn't start with the phone call either. It starts on a rainy afternoon in March, 2 years before any of this, when I was elbow deep in a filing cabinet on the 18th floor of One Savannah Center, looking for a misplaced vendor contract that Peggy swore she'd filed under V, and I swore she'd filed under whatever letter she felt like that day. I never found the vendor contract. What I found instead was a dusty manila folder wedged behind the hanging files, fat with documents that hadn't seen daylight since the Reagan administration. The tab read, Harmon Equity Partners, Founding Charter and Blaws. Origin, 1987. I almost put it back. Almost. I don't know what made me sit down and read it. Maybe boredom. Maybe something older and angrier than boredom. Because here's the thing about working for your father-in-law. It's not just a job. It's a daily reminder of exactly where you rank in someone else's story. And Buck Harmon had made it very clear from the moment Shelby introduced us 17 years ago at a dinner party in Ardsley Park that I was a supporting character in his. When Shelby introduced us, he looked me up and down the way a man inspects a used car he didn't ask to test drive, and he said, "So you're the one Shelby's been hiding. What is it you do again?" I told him I was in financial consulting. He nodded like I'd said I collected coupons. That was our beginning. It never really got better. So yes, maybe what made me sit down and read that founding charter was 6 years of being called sport by a 78-year-old man who built his entire identity on looking down at people from whatever height he could find. I read every single page, slowly. The way you read something when you have a feeling your life is about to change, and you don't want to miss a single word. I almost missed it anyway. It was buried in Section 14, subsection C, dressed in the kind of legal language designed to make your eyes glaze and move on. But I read it 3 times and then a 4th, and by the 5th time I wasn't reading anymore. I was calculating. The clause said this: any employee of Harmon Equity Partners who is terminated without documented cause, following no fewer than 5 years of continuous full-time service, shall be entitled to equity compensation equivalent to 18% of company shares, valued at the time of termination. I sat very still for a long time. Then I called Randy. "Say that again," Randy said. We were at the Rusty Anchor on River Street, 2 beers in, the tourists gone, the bartender wiping glasses at the far end of the bar like he was paid to be invisible. "Say it slower this time. If Buck fires me without cause, after 5 continuous years of service, I said I get 18% of the company." Randy stared at me. "You've already been there 4 years. 4 years and 2 months. He picked up his beer, put it down without drinking. "Craig, that's not a clause, that's a lottery ticket. It's better than a lottery ticket. Lottery tickets are random. This one I can control." "How?" "I make him fire me. On my terms." After year 5, Randy looked at me the way a man looks at his best friend when he can't decide if he's watching a genius or a man having a very calm breakdown. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Does Shelby know?" "Not yet. You need to tell her." "I know. Craig." He leaned forward. "You need to tell her everything. Because if anybody in this world has a reason to want that old man brought down a peg, or 12, it's her." He wasn't wrong, and I think somewhere in the back of my mind I already knew that. I just needed to hear it out loud. Here's what you need to understand about Shelby before I go any further, because this story belongs to her just as much as it belongs to me. Shelby Johnson is 44 years old. She is the sharpest person I have ever met in my life. Sharper than any analyst on the 18th floor, sharper than Donna Merritt, who went to Georgetown Law and never lets anyone forget it. Sharper than Buck himself, though he would sooner swallow glass than admit it. She has her mother's eyes and her father's brain, and she has spent the better part of her adult life being grateful for one of those things, and quietly furious about the other. Buck Harmon married Darlene Whitfield in 1974. By all accounts, the early years were fine, But Buck had a way of growing into his worst qualities the richer he got. And by the time Shelby was 12 years old, the house on Skidaway Island was not a good place to be. Buck didn't hit. He was too controlled for that, too image conscious. What he did was meaner and harder to prove. The kind of cruelty that lives in tone of voice and the specific way a man can make a woman feel like a burden simply by looking at her. He talked over Darlene at dinner parties. He corrected her in front of guests. He managed her the way he managed his portfolio, tracking every expenditure, questioning every decision, making her feel like a liability he was generously choosing to carry. Shelby watched all of it. Every dinner, every dismissal, every quiet moment where her mother's shoulders would drop half an inch and she'd excuse herself from the table and not come back for 20 minutes. Darlene finally left when Shelby was 19. She packed 2 bags on a Wednesday morning while Buck was at the office, drove herself to her sister's house in Charleston, and filed for divorce 3 days later. Buck's response was to act wounded in public and litigious in private. The settlement took 2 years and cost Darlene more than it should have, because Buck had lawyers and patience and a complete absence of guilt. Shelby never forgave him. Not fully. Not the way fathers in the movies get forgiven in the third act with a speech and a hug. The forgiveness that Buck Harmon got from his daughter was the functional kind. The kind that lets you sit across a dinner table from someone without picking up a fork for the wrong reason. She maintained the relationship because Darlene asked her to, and because Shelby understood that burning that bridge completely would cost her more than it cost him. But she never forgot, and she never stopped keeping score. Which is why when I sat across from her at our kitchen table in Ardsley Park, with the founding documents spread between our coffee mugs, and walked her through Section 14, subsection C, she didn't gasp, she didn't panic, she didn't ask me if I was sure. She read it 3 times, slower than I had. Then she looked up. He's never once read these documents, has he? It wasn't a question. He inherited the company, I said. He inherited everything. Never had to fight for any of it. Something moved across her face. Not anger exactly. Older than anger. More patient. He made my mother feel worthless for 20 years, she said quietly. He made me feel like I married down because I married someone he didn't pick. He has called you sport for 6 years, Craig. 6 years. She looked back down at the document. What do you need from me? Here's what you need to understand about Buck Harmon. He is 78 years old, built like a man who was once physically imposing and has never updated his self-image since. He has a full head of white hair that he maintains with the dedication most people reserve for their health, a permanent tan from weekends on his boat, and the handshake of a man who believes firmness communicates dominance. He inherited Harmon Equity Partners from his own father, grew it during the best bull market in American history, and has been dining on that accomplishment ever since. He looks down on everyone, not occasionally, not situationally, structurally. It is load-bearing behavior for him. He needs someone beneath him the way a building needs a foundation. He made me VP of operations because he needed someone to blame when things went sideways. He gave me a corner office because Shelby pushed for it at a family dinner, and he couldn't say no in front of Darlene's ghost, meaning the idea of what Darlene would think, since she'd long since moved to Charleston and was living her best life and never looked back. He called me one of the good ones at the company Christmas party in front of 43 people and thought he was being generous. The man had no idea what was living inside his own walls. The plan required 2 things, patience and provocation. I needed to complete my 6th year with a spotless documented record while making myself just irritating enough that Buck's trigger finger stayed warm. Not enough to justify cause, just enough to keep him simmering. Shelby called it strategic aggravation. I called it the most exhausting performance of my life. For 2 full years, I did everything right on paper and everything wrong in Buck's gut. I questioned his decisions in board meetings, politely, with data, which is somehow worse than rudeness to a man like Buck. I copied Donna Merritt on emails Buck would have preferred stayed informal. I took my full lunch hour every single day. I stopped laughing at his golf stories. I started arriving at exactly 9 and leaving at exactly 5, which in Buck Harmon's world was basically a resignation letter he couldn't technically accept. You've been different lately, Buck told me one morning, swirling his coffee like a man who'd seen too many movies about powerful people. Something on your mind, sport? Just focused on the numbers, I said. They're looking strong. He didn't like that answer. He wanted me rattled. I gave him competent, and competent made him angrier than anything else I could have offered. I didn't know it yet, but Hank Prudhomme, Buck's VP and personal shadow, had already started whispering in Buck's ear, telling him I'd gotten too comfortable, that I was building something. I found this out from Peggy later, who heard everything and said nothing, which made her the most powerful person on the 18th floor. Then came the Paris idea. It was Shelby who planted it, which was the only way it would work. She brought it up over Sunday dinner at Buck's house, the kind of house that has a name instead of an address, and she did it the way she did everything, without drama, without telegraphing, just dropping it into the conversation like a stone into still water. Craig's never taken a real vacation, she said, refilling her water glass. 6 years. Not even a long weekend. I want us to go to Paris. 2 weeks. Constance, Buck's wife number 2, a pleasant woman from Augusta who had learned quickly not to have opinions at the dinner table, looked delighted. Oh, how romantic. Buck was cutting his steak. 2 weeks is a long time to be away. HR confirmed he has 31 unused vacation days, Shelby said. Donna's already signed off. Fully approved. She looked at me. Right? Fully approved, I said, and took a calm sip of sweet tea. Buck looked at me across that table, long enough to communicate something he couldn't say out loud. I held his gaze just long enough to be comfortable, and not long enough to be a challenge. He went back to his steak. Have fun, he said, like it cost him something. It cost him everything. He just didn't know it yet. We landed in Paris on Friday, June 6th. Shelby and I stood on the balcony of our hotel near the Seine, and she touched her wine glass to mine and said, "How many days?" 8, I said. Then he calls. You sure? Randy gave him 72 hours before he couldn't stand it anymore. I gave him 8 days. I know him better. She smiled. The real one. The one that 6 years of Sunday dinners with Buck Harmon had made rare enough that I kept count. On day 2, I sent Buck a photo of the Eiffel Tower. Caption, "Incredible city. Highly recommend." No response. Day 4, I had Peggy push 3 meetings to the following week, knowing the information would travel through Dale to Buck like water finding its level. Day 6, Shelby sent Constance a video from a rooftop restaurant. Constance sent it to Buck within the hour. She always does. Day 8 was Friday, June 13th. I was on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching Paris wake up, when my phone rang. I looked at the screen, then through the glass door at Shelby sitting on the bed. She looked up and nodded once. I answered. Buck, I said, what in the hell do you think you're doing? That voice. 30 years of employees had wilted under that voice. Preston tells me your whole department is running on autopilot. I've got 3 client calls pushed without my say-so, and you're standing in France eating, what? Croissants. I let him run. Almost to the end. Buck, don't you buck me. I am the CEO of this company and I built it from nothing. He hadn't, but this was not the moment, and I will not have some. You come back, tonight. You hear me? Tonight. Or don't bother coming back at all. You're done. We don't need somebody who disappears when real work needs doing. Lazy behavior, sport. Always knew you didn't have the... I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a real one. Deep, genuine 6 years in the making laughter that came up from somewhere Buck Harmon had been pressing down on for a very long time. Then I hung up. Shelby was in the doorway. Did he say it? He said it. All of it? She walked over, took the coffee right out of my hand, drank from it, and handed it back. Outside, the Seine moved the way it always has, slow, unbothered, indifferent to the kingdoms of small men. So what now? She said. I looked out over the city one last time. Paris in the morning. Gold and ancient and completely uninterested in Buck Harmon or his 30-year kingdom, or whatever he was throwing across his office right now on Skidaway Island. Now we finish our vacation, I said, and then we go home and take everything that was always ours. We had 8 days left. Neither of us wasted a single one. There is a specific kind of silence that greets a man who just got fired over the phone in Paris and chose to finish his vacation. Anyway. I know this because I walked back into Savannah on Sunday, June 15th, and that silence met me at baggage claim, followed me to the car, and rode shotgun all the way down I-16, like a hitchhiker who knew exactly where we were going. Shelby drove. She always drives when something important is happening, says it keeps her calm. I've always suspected it's because she likes being in control of the vehicle when the world outside it is about to catch fire. You ready? She asked, merging onto Abercorn Street. I've been ready for 2 years. That's not what I asked. I looked at her. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. She nodded and said nothing else. But her grip on the wheel loosened just slightly, and I noticed, and I didn't say anything about it either. That's 20 years of marriage working the way it's supposed to. We didn't go to the office that day. Sunday was for unpacking, regrouping, and letting Buck Harmon marinate in whatever he'd been cooking since Friday. I'd learned over 6 years that the most powerful thing you can do to a man who needs control is give him silence. No calls, no emails, no groveling, just nothing. And nothing, to a man like Buck, is absolutely deafening. Randy came by that evening with a bottle of Blanton's, and the energy of a man who had been waiting 8 days to hear a full debrief. Walk me through it, he said, settling into my armchair like he owned it, which he basically did given how many hours he'd logged in it. Start from the phone call. So I did, and when I got to the part where I laughed and hung up, Randy covered his face with both hands and made a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a prayer. You hung up on Buck Harmon, he said. I did, mid-sentence. Technically just before the end of a sentence, yes. He looked at Shelby. Is he always like this? 20 years, she said, pouring herself a glass. You get used to it. Randy raised his bourbon to section 14, subsection C. We drank to that, all three of us. And for about 45 minutes sitting in our living room in Ardsley Park, with the ceiling fan turning slow overhead, and Savannah doing its warm June thing outside the windows, everything felt almost too easy. I didn't know it yet, but Easy was about to take an extended leave of absence. Monday, June 16th. Day one of the rest of Buck Harmon's life, though he didn't know it yet. I put on my best suit, the charcoal one Shelby picked out 3 Christmases ago, that Buck once called a little much for the office, and I drove downtown. I parked in my usual spot in the One Savannah Center garage, took the elevator to the 18th floor, and walked through the glass doors of Harmon Equity Partners at exactly 8:59 in the morning. The reception area went quiet, the way a restaurant goes quiet when someone walks in and everyone recognizes them, but nobody wants to be the first to say so. Lola Crane, my secretary, was at her desk. She looked up and her eyes did 3 things in rapid succession: relief, panic, and then the professional mask that she'd spent 15 years perfecting. She was good, but I was better. Morning, Lola, I said. Mr. Johnson, she said carefully. I wasn't sure we'd be seeing you today. Why wouldn't you? She opened her mouth, closed it, glanced down the hall toward Buck's corner office. Mr. Harmon called a department head meeting for 9 o'clock. Perfect, I said. I love department head meetings. I went anyway. The conference room on the 18th floor has floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the Savannah River, which is a beautiful view that nobody ever actually looks at, because Buck Harmon fills every room he enters the way weather fills a forecast. He was standing at the head of the table when I walked in, reading glasses on, a stack of papers in front of him, looking every one of his 78 years and refusing to acknowledge a single one of them. Hank Prudhomme was to his left. Preston, always positioned exactly 1 seat closer to Buck than everyone else, was to his right. Carol Stanton, the board's swing vote and the only person in that room whose opinion actually mattered in the long run, was at the far end, scrolling her phone with the focused disinterest of a woman who had seen everything. The room had 7 people in it. It had 8 when I walked in. Buck looked up. And here is what I want you to understand about that moment. The man did not flinch. 78 years of absolute authority had given him a face that simply did not register surprise in any visible way. What crossed his expression instead was something slower and more deliberate. Recalibration. Like a chess player who just watched the opponent make a move he hadn't expected and was now deciding whether to be impressed or angry. He chose angry. He always chose angry. Craig, he said. The way you say the name of a dog that has just chewed through its leash. Buck, I said. The way you say the name of a man who doesn't know he's already lost. I sat down, helped myself to the coffee carafe in the center of the table. Poured slowly. Nobody said a word. Hank Prudhomme was looking at his notepad with the intensity of a man trying to telepathically communicate that he wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. You were terminated, Buck said, quietly, which was somehow worse than loud. Over the phone, I said, while I was on approved vacation. Yes, I took a sip of coffee. This is good. Did we get a new blend? This is not the time for, Hank started. Hank, Buck said. And Hank stopped immediately, which was the most exercise Hank's spine had gotten in years. Buck kept his eyes on me. You were terminated. That means you don't work here. That means this is not your meeting, and that is not your coffee, and I'd like to talk to Donna, I said. Silence. Donna Merritt, I clarified as if there were multiple Donnas and I wanted to be specific. Your head of legal counsel. I'd like a meeting with her this morning. I have some questions about my separation. HR questions. Routine stuff. I said the word routine the way you'd say it about something that was absolutely not routine. Buck stared at me for a long moment. His jaw was doing that thing it does, that slow, grinding thing that Shelby once told me he'd done since she was a child, usually right before something in the house got very loud or very cold. Get out of my building, he said. Sure, I said, standing buttoning my jacket. Tell Donna I'll be at the Rusty Anchor. She knows where it is. I looked around the table. Good seeing everybody. Carol, love that blazer. Carol Stanton pressed her lips together very firmly to conceal something that might have been a smile. I walked out. Behind me, I heard Buck say something to Hank in a voice like gravel under a boot heel. And I heard Hank scramble, and I heard the door open and close, and I walked to the elevator and pressed the lobby button, and rode down 18 floors with the calm of a man who has been waiting 2 years for a Monday morning. Donna Merritt called at 11:47. I was on my second coffee at the Rusty Anchor, which wasn't technically open yet, but whose owner, a wide man named Sal who owed Randy a favor from a story I'd never been fully told, had let me sit at the bar in exchange for a conversation about the Braves bullpen situation. Craig, Donna said. She had the voice of a woman who had delivered bad news so many times it had become neutral. I think we need to meet. I suggested that this morning. I know. A pause. Not here. Not at the office. That pause told me everything. Donna Merritt was Buck's lawyer in the same way a surgeon is a hospital surgeon. Employed there, professional loyalties intact, but ultimately governed by a code that superseded the employer. And something in that pause told me she'd spent her morning reading documents she hadn't read before. Specifically, I suspected, a founding charter from 1987. You've been doing some reading, I said. Another pause. Longer. Where are you? The Rusty Anchor. I'll be there at 1. She hung up. I looked at Sal. You got anything to eat back there? It's 11 in the morning. It's been a long week. Donna Merritt arrived at 1 o'clock on the dot, which is the only way Georgetown law people know how to arrive. She was 51, trim, wearing a jacket the color of storm clouds, and carrying a leather portfolio that I was absolutely certain contained a printed copy of Section 14, subsection C. She sat down across from me, ordered water, looked at my beer, and said nothing about it. You've read it, I said. When did you find it? She asked. 2 years ago. She closed her eyes briefly. 2 years. March. Rainy afternoon. Filing cabinet. 18th floor. She opened the portfolio. There it was, printed, highlighted in yellow, with handwritten margin notes in the tight cursive of a woman who had been taking legal notes since before some of my colleagues were born. She turned it to face me, even though we both knew I had it memorized. You understand what you're claiming, she said. 18% of Harmon Equity Partners, I said, valued at current market, which given the Belcor acquisition last quarter, puts the company at somewhere north of, I know what it's worth, Craig. Then you know what 18% is worth. She looked at me steadily. He's going to fight this. I know. He has resources. He has lawyers beyond me. He will make this ugly and long and expensive. I know that too. And you're prepared for that. I leaned forward. Donna, I found that clause 2 years ago. I spent 2 years building an immaculate employment record. I documented every performance review, every commendation, every approved absence. I have 6 years of clean, unimpeachable service, and a termination that was delivered verbally over an international phone call, with 0 documented cause to an employee on approved vacation. I sat back. I'm not just prepared. I've been packed and waiting by the door. Donna looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked down at the highlighted clause. Then she did something I did not expect from Donna Merritt, who I had seen remain stone-faced through a merger dispute that made 3 grown men cry. She exhaled, long and slow, like something she'd been holding for a while. He fired you while you were in Paris, she said. Not a question. More like she was reading it into a record somewhere. Friday the 13th, I said. 8 days into an approved 2-week vacation, because I sent him a photo of the Eiffel Tower and didn't grovel fast enough. Something moved across Donna's face, something that had nothing to do with law. He called my mother a financial liability, she said quietly, almost to herself. During the Hendricks account dispute, in front of the whole team, she looked up. I've worked for that man for 11 years. I said nothing. I just let that sit. She closed the portfolio, straightened it on the bar with both hands. You're going to need outside counsel. I can't represent you, obvious conflict. But I know who you should call. She pulled a business card from the inside pocket of her portfolio and slid it across the bar. She's good, better than good, and she will absolutely love this case. I picked up the card, looked at it. One more thing, Donna said, standing, gathering herself back into her professional shape. The board meets Thursday, regular quarterly session. Carol Stanton chairs the governance committee. She held my gaze for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. Attendance is open to any active stakeholder. Then she picked up her water, took one sip, set it down, and walked out. I looked at the business card for a long moment. Then I called Shelby. It's moving, I said when she picked up. How fast? I looked at the card in my hand, then out the window at the Savannah River, brown and slow and older than every single problem Buck Harmon had ever created. Faster than he's going to be able to keep up with, I said. On the other end of the line, my 44-year-old wife, who had watched her father dismantle her mother, one dinner party at a time, who had spent 20 years maintaining a relationship with a man who saw her as an accessory to his legacy, who had read Section 14, subsection C, and felt something shift permanently inside her, laughed, really laughed. And somewhere across town, in a corner office on the 18th floor of One Savannah Center, I was willing to bet that Buck Harmon's jaw was grinding again. Good. Let it grind. Thursday was 4 days away, and I had a board meeting to prepare for. 6 years of sport, 6 years of bad coffee, manufactured gratitude, and swallowing things that should have been said out loud in rooms full of people. 6 years of watching a 78-year-old man run his kingdom like God had personally endorsed him for the role. Thursday came like it always does, quietly, without ceremony, completely indifferent to the fact that everything was about to change. I was up at 5:30, showered, dressed, standing in the kitchen in the charcoal suit while Savannah did its slow, humid morning thing outside the window. Shelby came downstairs at 6, saw me standing there, and didn't say good morning. Just walked to the cabinet, pulled out 2 mugs, and poured. Today, she said. Not a question. Today, I said. We drank in silence. It was the most married we had ever felt in 20 years together, which is saying something considerable. I arrived at 8:40 with my outside counsel, Victoria Reese, referred by Donna Merritt, 53 years old, 38 wins from 41 cases, and the kind of woman who walks into a room like she's already read the ending. We rode the elevator to the 18th floor. Lola Crane looked up, saw us both, and reached for her phone. Don't bother, I said. We know the way. Buck was at the head of the conference table, Hank to his left, Preston to his right, Carol Stanton at the far end with a legal pad and reading glasses, and the patience of someone who had been waiting for this particular meeting longer than she'd admitted to anyone. Victoria distributed 12 bound copies of Section 14, subsection C, without ceremony or preamble. The room read. The room went quiet. Buck's jaw started grinding. This is a stunt, he said. It's a clause, Mr. Harmon, Victoria said in the tone of a kindergarten teacher correcting a child who genuinely knows better. A legally binding clause in your own founding document. Mr. Johnson was terminated without documented cause after 6 years and 4 days of continuous full-time service. The threshold was 5 years. The math isn't complicated. I want Donna in here. The door opened, Donna Merritt walked in, and sat exactly in the middle of the table. Not Buck's side, not mine, which told the room everything. Tell them it's unenforceable, Buck said. Donna looked up from her portfolio. The clause is enforceable. I've spent 3 days looking for a way to tell you otherwise, and I cannot find one. She said it the way doctors deliver hard news. Clean. Final. I'm sorry. Something moved across Buck's face that I had never seen there in 6 years. The specific expression of a man who has just run out of room. He turned to me, and he made the mistake that men like him always make when the walls close in. He went personal. You never belonged here, he said. Low. Controlled. The voice that had made Darlene excuse herself from dinner tables for 20 years. I gave you a job because my daughter asked me to. You have been a passenger since day one. A well-dressed, ungrateful passenger. And you want to stand there and claim 18% of something you had absolutely nothing to do with building. Dad? Every head turned. Shelby was at the back of the room. She'd been there the whole meeting, sitting quietly in the corner where everyone had assumed she was one of Victoria's associates. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the center of the room with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who had been waiting 44 years to arrive at this exact moment. Buck's face did something complicated. I watched you make Mom excuse herself from the table, she said. Quiet, even, still. Every Sunday for 7 years, she'd come back 20 minutes later with her eyes too bright, and you'd just keep talking, like she didn't matter enough to pause a sentence for. She stopped 5 feet from him. I watched her pack 2 bags and drive to Charleston because staying had become something she physically couldn't do, and then you spent 2 years punishing her for it. She looked at her father the way you look at something you finally decided to put down. You gave Craig this job out of pity and called him sport for 6 years, and told a room full of people he was one of the good ones like he needed your validation to exist. Her voice never rose. That was the devastating part. You built this company on your father's money and your employees' dignity, and today it costs you everything because you fired your son-in-law from Paris on a Friday the 13th, because a photograph of the Eiffel Tower bruised your ego. She paused. I love you because you're my father. I have never once been proud of who you are. She walked back to her seat. Carol Stanton cleared her throat. All in favor of recognizing Mr. Johnson's equity claim under Section 14, subsection C. 7 hands. Buck sat in silence. It didn't matter. He was already finished. The rest happened the way real consequences always happen, not in one moment, but in accumulating weight. Peggy Tillman walked into Victoria's office Friday morning with a 4-year-old manila folder that made Victoria go very still. By the end of that week, 11 former employees had come forward. Wrongful termination, hostile work environment, a discrimination complaint that had been waiting 14 months for exactly this kind of momentum. Each case individual, together a demolition. Buck's legal bills compounded daily. His attorneys stopped softening the arithmetic. The board removed him the following Thursday. He resisted selling his equity for 2 weeks, the resistance of a man who knows that selling means admitting, and then he stopped resisting. Because pride is expensive, and he had finally run the numbers. He sold to Carol Stanton, quietly, on a Thursday afternoon. No ceremony. No photograph in the lobby. Just a signature on a document in a building that had already moved on before he stood up to leave. I sold my 18% to Carol Stanton 2 weeks later. Randy asked me why, 3 times in increasing volume. I gave him the same answer each time. I never wanted the company. I wanted the clause. I wanted a man who had spent his life making people feel small, to finally sit down at the level of everyone he'd looked down on. That had happened. Everything else was paperwork. The number Carol paid was more than enough. More than enough to leave. Shelby and I sat at the kitchen table in Ardsley Park one last time. Same table, same mugs. The table where 2 years ago I'd spread those founding documents and changed everything. Where, she said. Somewhere that doesn't know his name, I said. She looked out the window at the oak trees and the Spanish moss and 12 years of Savannah light. Then she set down her mug. I'll start packing, she said. We were gone by August. Darlene heard the full story from Shelby over the phone. When Shelby finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the calm of a woman who had earned every single syllable of it, I always knew that man would run out of people willing to be small for him. Then she asked if Shelby wanted to visit Charleston for a long weekend. Shelby said yes before she'd finished the sentence. Randy called every Sunday wherever we landed. One evening months after we'd left, he asked if I missed it. I thought about the 18th floor, the charcoal suit, the filing cabinet on a rainy afternoon that started everything. Not even a little, I said. Some men spend their whole lives building kingdoms. Buck Harmon built one for 30 years and lost it on a Thursday in July because he called his son-in-law a lazy pig from Paris and couldn't finish the sentence before the line went dead. 6 years of sport. 1 clause. 1 patient man. And a woman who had been keeping score since she was 12 years old and never once lost count. If you liked this story, Join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of the sphere.